Alright, hey everybody, and welcome to the next episode of Coalitions Revisited. I completely forgot, and luckily someone pointed out, that I haven't even touched Israel yet. I was under the assumption that only the Soviets and, blue and red mix were left, but I think, at least I'm pretty certain, maybe I'm doing it twice now, but I don't think I do. I'm pretty certain that I haven't touched Israel yet, so here we are. Um, I'm certainly no huge expert on Israel, but at the same time, I don't think there are any, at least of the very strong players that I know. I don't think there's anyone who quote unquote mains Israel. I think everyone just plays it every now and then, but I think there's nobody, at least I don't know of anyone who's like, oh yeah, Israel is my favorite deck. For one reason or another, I don't know. Israel is also, I think, out of all the DLC decks that are often or sometimes considered pay to win, meaning Israel, Yugoslavia, and Baltic. I feel like Israel is the one that splits people the most. Um, I am of the opinion that it is most definitely basically on the same level as Entente and Baltic. In one versus ones, maybe not so much. It's a bit more map specific and matchup specific than the other two decks. In team games, it is probably stronger than both of them, I'd say, or at the very least on the same level. Um, what I'm saying is, I'm not saying it is, pay to win directly, but it can keep up with the other two DLC factions. There are some people who don't think that is the case, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about the individual units or overall strength of the deck indirectly. So let's just go over them. Logistics, your infantry CV, pretty basic. There's nothing too spectacular about it. I don't think it's really worth taking like the heavy transports. I can see the point in taking them in the Arzrit just to make sure they definitely or have a very high chance of arriving at the spot. But at the same time, nearly always you're not gonna buy a CV unless the route is safe anyways, and you have like at least a somewhat safe position in the zone. So I think it's not really worth paying for, both when it comes to the 5 extra points, which obviously isn't a huge deal, but most notably the speed penalty compared to the BTR 152 or the Anafa. By the way, the Anafa is it's not really a huge deal, but it is really like effectively pay to win because it is literally a copy of the Norwegian Bell 412, and I think other nations might also get this specific Huey. But it's effectively a Huey that is a bit faster and has more HP as well as a bit more fuel and autonomy. But Israel doesn't pay the extra 5 points that Norway has to pay. I'm not sure if there are other nations that also have that Huey version, but I just thought that it's a funny little oversight. Like I said, it's by no means a big deal. However, the extra HP, what I mean is the Anafa being 5 points too cheap, or the Battle 412 being 5 points too expensive, whatever it is the case, it's not a huge deal by any means. But the 2 extra HP certainly help. If there's like a helicopter hunter in the opener while you have Maglans in the Anafa or something, and they often have 4 only, or nearly always they have only 4 or 5 HE on their short range missiles. And if they don't get a gun run on you and only a missile off, you can survive that missile. I think the only exception is the MiG-29 that has 6 HE on these missiles, but I think you get the point. Obviously not a huge deal, but I think it's funny and it's worth pointing out. So yeah, I think in pretty much every scenario you either want the Anafa simply for it because it is a helicopter, or the BTR 152. You usually track BTRP Hood. It's honestly not too bad. It has 1 armor all around. Sadly, only 0 top, which most notably against cluster is an issue. It does have a Browning though, and also not. It actually doesn't have very good off-road speed. Yeah. Main advantage is the 10 HP, of course, and the Browning. Don't underestimate the Browning. A Browning on a CV can actually be quite useful, and I think with the Israel availability bonus of 10%. No, you still only get 4. But I think this, no, you don't get extra CVs on this. Okay. Yeah, but I think the obvious star, the obvious unicorn of the logistics tab is the Azarit Bikud. Absolute monster of a CV. It's very hard to kill. 2 top armor is not very, it's not amazing, but for 130 points, what more can you ask for? Like, I think the most direct comparison would obviously be the Centurion. And while the Centurion does have a gun and a Browning, which certainly in some situations can be crucial even, it is significantly slower. It has worse front armor, which obviously isn't a big deal. Back armor is worth pointing out because, for example, HE bombs or HE MLRS can obviously hit back armor as well, so the difference between 2 and 5 can be quite noticeable there. But the most important thing, the off-road speed as well as the availability. You only get 3 per card on the Centurion and 4 per card on the Azarit. Although in Scandinavia, I am pretty sure you get 4 per card on the Centurion due to the availability bonus. No, you still only get 3 even. What's the availability bonus in Scandinavia? It's 15%. All right. I guess you would need 20%. What's Lancet? Lancet is also 15%. But yeah, Azarit, probably the best. If I had to say there, if I had, it's obviously most of the time not a huge deal, but it can obviously clutch out a game or something for you. But if there would be an award for the best CV, it would probably most likely be the Azarit. It's just so goddamn good. And not being a prototype also means that it is available to mixed mechanized, blue for mechanized. And this basically invalidates, I mean, there's no reason to take this over the Azarit unless obviously there's a specialization or a category that can't take the Azarit. But if you have access to both, there's literally no reason to take the Mugav over the Azarit. Like, no. Obviously, you could. Well, there is a reason. You pay 10 points less, but you get the point, right? And they also have the same availability. And in a sense, the same with the Merkava. Sure, the Merkava does have a gun and 2 MGs, but it does have 3 top armor, which could be a point for the Merkava. But for one, again, it only comes at 3 per card, the Azarit at 4. It has worse back armor, but gets a bit more top armor, so there's that. A slightly worse side armor, though 5 versus 6 side armor against HE isn't really very noticeable. The jump from 2 to 3 is fairly noticeable, as well as 2 to 5 compared to the Centurion, of course. And that obviously 3 to 5 is also a somewhat noticeable jump, but I think from 3, but most definitely 4 or 5 onwards, it doesn't matter as much anymore. Yeah, like I said, the guns obviously can sometimes make a difference. You are slower, 10 kmh. When you're trying to evade bombs or artillery, especially in a forest, can potentially make the difference. Very, very rarely, but maybe not so rarely, just save you some HP. But of course, the Azarit being so cheap also means that you don't mind, leaving it at the base or something in the opener, or buying 2. If you buy 2 Azarit CVs, it's 260. Buying 2 Merkavas, it's 320. It's 60 points already if you start with 2 CVs. So the Azarit is just in such a. This Azarit is just straight up underpriced, but at the same time, on a CV unit, where you get 4 per card and that costs more than 100 points, it's obviously not going to be a deal breaker when it comes to like the strength of a deck, but it's just one of these small things that seems to be fairly exclusive to DLC decks sometimes. But then again, we also have the Longbow for the US, which is probably the most unique unit or the biggest unicorn in the game, I would argue. But that's a different discussion. Yeah, Karagoth, very funny. Fob, supplied, nothing too outstanding. I like to run 2 cards of supply trucks on top of the fob. Fob is basically, you can, obviously in a 1 versus 1, you can play without a fob. I tried it, but while it isn't necessary, I think you gain quite a lot from using a fob, even if you're not even using artillery, and I'll get to that in a bit. And then I like to run both of these just to have flexibility when calling them out. If I just want to supply a single ATGM squad, I get a Rio. If I need more supply on the front line, and it also needs to be there a bit faster, especially if there's a lot of forests. The off-road speed will make quite a difference. I get the Oshkosh, and also don't forget Israel, while being on a coalition level, gets 60 activation points, as opposed to 55 on other coalitions. In my Mon versus 1 deck, I obviously only have 1 card, as you can see, but I think in my team deck I have 2. No, I don't. I have only the Oshkosh. Well, maybe, I guess I could replace one of the Dragons, but I guess what you learn from that is don't listen to me. No, in all seriousness, there's a point in running both of them, but I guess it's also not. Obviously, if you run a fob, 1 card is mandatory, but if you don't run a fob, I would definitely take 2 cards. I think that's what I was actually doing before I was running a fob. I think I was running 2 cards of supplies. That's why I was thinking of that. Infantry tab. Infantry itself, if we ignore the transports, is pretty weak. Dorban aside. Rovite are worse riflemen because the MG on line infantry is pretty bad. Rovite 90 are literally Sochungsu 85 stat copy, so they're very good for 10 points. They're very good. Like Sochungsu, they also do depend heavily on transports, however, but that is not an issue for Israel. Barkhan, Base Stinger. Israel is one of the decks, similarly to Lanju, that benefits significantly more from manpads than other decks usually do. And I think it is also a bit easier to fit them in than other decks due to the way their infantry game is played. So might not be the worst thing to put into your deck if you're playing unspec. I would definitely take them in the BTR 152, but 5-pointer also works, of course. Obviously, red are garbage. Dorban LR, the best ATGM squad in the game, although some people prefer the Chumat, because for 1 you get 1 more per card, and 2 you get 2 cards of Chumats, or the Finnish Spike, which has a bit less range but has 2 more per card. Availability aside, I would say it's definitely the best ATGM in game, even though it does have 5 less AP than the Milan 3, of course. However, for 1, it has more range. 2, it has more accuracy, quite a bit more accuracy. It's ridiculously accurate. And thirdly, and that is not seen on the unit card, and I guess you could, Cell and Cyclos usually have different speeds, but not shown on the unit card, the missile is ridiculously fast. Of course, up front, you're not going to do a lot of damage to heavy tanks or even super heavies. But if you position them a bit on flanks, they're going to be so hard to evade if the enemy is in the middle of a firefight with their tanks and they see that ATGM coming. There's little to no reaction time for them, or little to no time for them to react and turn the tank around. So there's such a huge threat. They're also being a lot more accurate and this fast. They're also a lot more efficient than other ATGMs as well, meaning that they miss a lot less. They're an absolute must in a deck, even if you use Maglans. They're just so damn good. And compared to Maglans, not only do they get more range and 1 more missile, but Maglans also have a noise penalty, meaning that they are easier to detect when firing than Dorbans. Actually, they even carry 4 instead of 5, like I assumed. But yeah, they're just, if you most of you probably knew that already, but in case you didn't, they're just absolute monsters. Even though you might think, oh, but even Milan 2, they're better, they have 24 AP. No, they're just absolutely ridiculous. And we have these, which are bad. Sure, you know, they might be okay for like defending towns, but they have only 5 HP, meaning they're easy to kill. They have no MG. SMG online infantry is bad. They have only 35% accuracy. They're a bit buggy. The HE of 2 is not very good considering you fire only every 5 seconds, and even if you hit, you don't do a lot of suppression damage, I think. They're just awkward to use and very, very niche, and even in that niche, they're not particularly good. Givati themselves, they are not really particularly bad. Don't be fooled by the 600 RPM. They have a very high rate of fire, but they're also quite affected by morale as a trade-off. So don't be fooled to think that they have a ridiculous MG. They don't. They themselves, they aren't really horrible, but at the same time, they might be decent for like basically city fights, where line infantry is usually very bad at. But for that specific scenario, which you want at least one card of, I think, in your deck, I think there are better options. Don't use them as your main infantry, like your all-round infantry. If you use them, only really use them for town fights, to get rid of other infantry, of course. Other than that, you should just stick to Rovite 90, but we'll go to those in a bit. Mesayat, or whatever it's pronounced. I mean, they're 5-man grenade launcher teams. They're very strong. They deal a lot of damage to infantry, and even against vehicles, they often crit or at least panic them. So they're not really useless against those, and they're also very hard to spot, even when firing. Not really used very well offensively, at least not without meat shields in front of them, be it either the transports or other infantry, or even tanks. There's no real need for them, but if you can fit them in, or if for some reason you need something to defend towns better against enemy infantry, they do that incredibly well. Just be aware you only get, I believe, 12, or I guess in Israel you get probably 13 per card, and they have only 5 HP, so they're easy to lose, and you don't get a lot of them per card. Some people like to use them because basically everyone runs a card of the Merkava to A transport, which we'll also get to in a bit. Some people use the Messiahs in them instead of Rovite, which you can also do. You know, if they just for, you know, since the Merkava to A you basically buy for the tank itself, not for the infantry. So some people just like to run these and then just to have access to them in a certain way, or still have like a squad or two around on the field, which they can then use for these purposes. Militia, I mean, the militia itself is actually pretty good. They have one of the best, I think the best anti-tank weapon you get on militia, and battle rifles is probably what you would prefer because they actually have a chance to hit. Even though the rate of fire is obviously abysmally low. The transport, however, is pretty bad. You do get a Browning, and you are pretty fast off-road, but you have horrible autonomy and only one front armor, so it dies to a sneeze, and there's a chance that it won't even get to the front line if it's on a big map, so I wouldn't use them. No real reason to use Rovite over Rovite 90, which are just objectively better. You obviously get a few less per card, but don't forget Israel gets a 10% availability bonus, so it's not a huge deal. And Rovite 90 you want to spam into Zelda, 2 front armor, meaning it doesn't die to something like a base law or a base RPG-7 in one hit. It is more resilient to autocannons, it is more resilient to HE damage, and even tanks that don't have 20 AP will take 2 shots to kill this. And it has 3 MGs, being amazing fire support, especially in forests. Absolute beast of a transport. It is a bit slow, but considering that Merkavas are also not the fastest, that's in this deck not really that big of an issue. Yeah. Murder infantry with your Zeldas, and the Rovite in front of it to tank the shots, and then, yeah, that's just, they should be your all-purpose infantry. Unless you want to assault towns, I guess you can still kind of do that, you know, if you can get your Zelda right in front of the town to open up with MG fire. But unless you need infantry to fight in CQC combat, these robot basically do all of your job. You, even if you, even if, I mean, obviously they're not gonna kill tanks and forests, but for that purpose, you don't really get any good infantry anyways. But you also don't need, because nearly all the time you have Makaras around, you have spikes around that even prevent the enemies to put tanks in the forest in the first place, or you have your tanks around. Shaitet, they're perfectly fine. They're not particularly great, but they're fine. They have, the main attraction on them is the 875 meter range on their anti-tank weapon. While the AP isn't very high, for 30 points, they're fine. Yeah, 875 meters is the main thing for them. The only ground transport they get is the Humvee, the Hammer. Again, not particularly great, but it serves its purpose. And instead of Givati, you can also just use these if in case you need CQC infantry. You can also obviously get them in a Nimrod, which is also a very it is a very powerful helicopter. With also the missile is ridiculously fast. Obviously has a ridiculously high AP, ridiculously high range and accuracy. It's an absolute monster of a missile. You can even snipe AA with that. Not rarely can you just tank the enemy AA shooting at you, and you kill the AA and survive with like 3 or 4 HP. Not too rare. Still, you have to be careful with this. It is an 80-point unit, so don't forget about that. And that doesn't include the infantry. It is very, very hard to fit in my experience, in the deck. And if you use it, I would definitely use them with a Shaitet and not with the Maglans, because you need the Maglans in affordable transports. Outside of that, yeah. It is a very strong unit, but you should be familiar with how to use expensive helicopters, because even though it does have 10 HP and it not rarely will kill enemy AA that shoots at it, it is still easy to lose. So if you're not comfortable or experienced with using high-end expensive helicopters, I wouldn't use it, but in the end it's obviously up to you. I can't tell you what you should do. Base Sanhanim are just bad. Yeah, I mean, they have 17 AP, but there's no reason to use them. If they had a 5-pointer, you could maybe use them, similarly to Givati, just for like pure CQC, but even then. Instead of them 85, 95 are basically Shaitet just in shock form. They get a carbine instead of an assault rifle, which is nice, but yeah, I mean, they're fine. They're effectively interchangeable. Sanhanim are a bit worse, but also a bit cheaper, and you get more per card. So if you are like, if you have Shaitet and you constantly run out of them too early, then maybe try Sanhanim. They have the same anti-tank weapon. And they're still fine against infantry. Obviously not as much, but you get more of them per card. Support. The TCM is basically mandatory to have any kind of wheeled AA, even if you use Stinger in a BTR 152. The TCM is very necessary just to have something wheeled that you can use as a reaction. It's not great, but it's fine. It serves its purpose, and is for some reason also 5 points cheaper than the VDAA. And no, the top armor, I guess the VDAA does have very good air detection. I actually, okay, maybe it's fine, I suppose, but it's yeah. Considering you have, sorry for that. Considering you have like no real other option, it's fine. Hovet, that's pivots, obviously. The pivots, the Hovet, the South Korean version of the pivots, and the Mahmet are the only specs with 0.2 seconds aim time on the main gun. Every other spec has 1 second, and that is both against ground and air targets, by the way. And that is huge. The pivots, obviously, has compared to something like a Gepard or something, obviously has the disadvantage of having worse range and no stabilizer, but the Mahbet does have maximum range for specs, excluding the automatic, and also has a stabilizer, so the gun itself is already a monster. On top of that, it does have stingers, which they're not huge, but you know, if the opponent is using seed, you know, or if the enemy planes are diving very deep into your AA net, you know, They can obviously help, but the gun itself, even for 60 points without a stinger, that thing would be a beast. The 0.2 seconds aim time, it's so massive. It actually is. 55-point chaparral, same thing as the US. It's really not amazing again, but ever since they buffed the chaparrals a long while ago when they still patched the games, yeah, it's fine. AA obviously being the main weakness of Israel, but most of the stuff is still somewhat serviceable. Don't be fooled by the model. I'm like very certain that it can only fire 4 shots in one salvo and not 6. I'm actually curious because the model is different. Let me quickly open the armory tool. You won't see that, but I'm just quickly gonna check if for some reason the Dragon can actually fire 6 missiles at once. I'm pretty sure it can't, and this is just a model bug. But you never know with Eugen. Recon. Yeah, it can only fire 4 shots before having to reload at 20 seconds. 6 HE is nice against stuff like Lynxes or Panthers. Still, even when you crit a plane, the plane will get out with 1 HP, assuming it has no armor. Yeah, like I said, for 55 points, it's fine. Not amazing, but you'll probably end up running it anyway to have a somewhat capable AA unit with no radar. And that's really all there is to it. Magmite is a bit of a meme. It eats supply like nothing. It doesn't have a high rate of fire. If for some reason you want a cheap, long-ish range HE output thing, it's fine, but for general purpose, meaning mostly smoke, the Laish is just better. It's cheaper, and doesn't eat, like, you only have 42 rounds here, which if you use a lot of smoke you can lose quickly, and it does use so much supply. So I would suggest using the Laish instead as your all-purpose mortar. And then this is just basically useless. 1 HE is obviously nothing, and the napalm that it sets on the ground is also basically useless. Of course, you can kind of deny an area and kind of, you know, stop enemy units that might be there from repairing by just, you know, panicking and dealing a bit of damage, but you don't even panic very efficiently. It's just not worth using. Also, it doesn't have any rockets on the model as well. Mark 90, that is quite a unit. This is a beast of a unit, very good at stunning, even decent at killing. Like a mini LRM, you get 3 per card. It's just an absolute beast. And let me actually check how much supply a Mark 90 uses compared to an LRM, meaning full salvo, of course. Because I actually don't know off the top of my head which one uses more. Mark 90 and then the LRM. So the LRM uses sorry, there we go. The LRM uses 69 per rocket, meaning it uses something like 840-ish per salvo, unless I'm bad at math, but I think it's roughly right. And the Mark 90 uses 125 per shot, meaning it uses 500. Yes, 500. So a full salvo uses less supply on the Mark 90. And the Mark 90 has to reload for 2 minutes, and the LRM for 132 seconds, so just over 2 minutes. So it's a bit lighter on supply. It reloads a bit quicker. Obviously, it covers a slightly smaller area, I believe, and it only has 4 rockets as opposed to 12. But at the same time, it having only, I mean, obviously the rockets have a bigger blast radius and actually deal a lot of damage. But at the same time, being only 4 missiles means they're a bit harder to evade, meaning that if the first 3-4 missiles are a bit off target, then your opponent has a slightly bigger time window to get out of the AoE effect. So the Mar 290 in that sense is a bit harder to evade, you know, if you get what I mean. R160 mini cluster. Some people swear on this unit. I don't think it is very good. You can do some mimi stuff, you know. AP4 obviously doesn't deal a lot of damage, but this unit basically lives of only dealing chip damage, you know, 1 damage here, 1 damage there. I have mixed feelings of this. I haven't using it, I haven't had any success, but I also don't remember any opponents having major success against me. Yeah, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's... If you can put in only 1 MLRS, I would always go for the Mar 290. The Doher, I believe, has 10 seconds aim time, and the Shoulder 15 seconds, just for information. But none of these tube artillery pieces are particularly or strong. They're all very basic, as you'd expect. And the M110s are just, you know, your typical M110s. The Romach only has 9 HE, but a lot of range, which is useless. So yeah, nothing more to say about these. Your usual hogs, you can run. I think I do run the 70-point hog in some of my decks. Not very mandatory, because you usually run a lot of ASFs, which are also very strong. But yeah, not particularly bad, but they're not really too good either. I also forgot to talk about the Merkava 2A. Again, I think most of you are well aware of this, but it is an absolute monster of a unit. Even though it only has 9 shots, it is very good at, you know, it's a medium tank. It has 18 armor, meaning it can even survive a peace run up. No, never mind. A peace run will, if it hits with both missiles, will just kill it. And it survives a 30 AP missiles to the front. You need 3 Apellas 90 shots. 3 Apellas shots to kill it, 3 Conqueror's M shots to kill it up front. It melts infantry with thanks to the grenade launcher, and in forests against other tanks, it also usually not rarely comes out ahead, because for one, the 15 AP, which is not too great, obviously gets to like 25 AP in forests, but also the grenade launcher means it will panic and even stun enemy tanks. You know, just an absolute beast. Sometimes you have to kind of turn off the main or micro the main gun, turn it off so it doesn't shoot at random transports. 9 rounds is a bit few, but still, it is just an absolute monster, and you should always take this in your deck. The Magach line, 55.1 isn't particularly good. 15 AP, not so great range, and 12 armor, which is not a particularly good threshold. Yeah, I wouldn't really use it, and you don't really need it as well. Like these lighter medium tanks are not very necessary at all, since you always have spikes around to deal with enemy IFVs or something, which would usually be the main target of these kind of tanks. 70 and 95 point Magars. 75.1 is effectively a copy of the Norwegian 105 NO2. Obviously, it's bigger, it's a bit slower. Some soft stats are different, but same AP, same RPM, same range, same front armor. It is a solid tank, but once again, 12 front armor means that at close range, it can easily get one-shot by enemy tanks. And again, it also mostly counters like IFVs and the like, which you have spikes for. 95 point Magach, however, is mostly the same, just 5 extra front armor as well as top armor, which is worth noting, and much better stabilizer. Very solid tank. Obviously is in the same slot as the Merkava 2A. But if you have the points, still kind of worth using, because it happens quickly that you lose a Merkava 2A, and on some maps or some matchups, or depending on your position on the map, you may not even want this and just want a medium tank that can pack a punch. And actually shoot more than 9 rounds. So it can, even though you will most likely also have this in your deck, and it does fill basically the same price range, there can be points where you would want to use this. Merkava 1 is basically a worse M1 Abrams, meaning your forest, anti-infantry, anti-light stuff, and in forest obviously also anti-tank tank. It does have one more extra front armor, which is obviously nice, but it is also quite a bit slower and doesn't have medium optics. And speed and optics are also a nice thing about the base M1 Abrams. So while you can use it similarly to that for forests, and I guess considering that the Zelda is slower than the M113, the lower speed isn't as big of an issue. But you can also, like I said, use this in forests similarly to the M1 Abrams behind your Zelda spam, behind your Rovite spam. And even though it does have only 13 AP, at forest ranges, it will pose a threat to other tanks, and other infantry will have quite some issue with killing this. And the jump from 15 to 16 AP actually means that Ipalas will need 3 shots instead of 2 compared to the M1 Abrams. So yeah, but again, considering you have the Merkava 2A, usually you will probably not run this. Merkava 2B is, again, basically an M1 IP. Once again, you get 1 more front armor, and once again, you're just slower. Yeah, you do have medium optics this time around, though. But I think this time around, definitely even less worth running because of the Gimel that you can have, and it is even closer to the vehicle tab transport Merkava 2A. 3B is an absolute beast of a tank. 21 front armor, 10 RPM, not auto-loaded by the way. 20 AP, and of course a grenade launcher. A heavy tank with a grenade launcher. Oh, it's a fucking beast of a tank. Obviously a must-have. You have to run this. I think what do we have in this price range even? We have this, yeah. Even if you ignore the grenade launcher, you trade 1 AP for 1 armor, which is fine, and 1 AP for 1 RPM. Which I think in most scenarios is probably a better trade, RPM for AP. It always depends on like the current the thresholds you're at, and the price range. But at the very least, I'd say that even without a grenade launcher, they're basically even. And then you get a fucking grenade launcher on top of this. This is just, yeah. 7 side armor, however, means that compared to the HC Abrams, you can get 1 shot to the side by other spikes or the Chumat, which is actually funny. Then we have obviously the Bass, which in the closed beta, or in the closed beta, in the preview version by Eugen, had 24 front armor, which thankfully got changed. Beast of a super heavy, 11 side armor is quite a lot. 22 front, 23 AP is basically average, like the Leopard 205. 10 RPM, 2800 meter range, and 80 GM. 60 kmh is pretty slow. Together with the Jelly 2 is the slow super heavy, so be aware of that. But I think the speed is really the only thing that it isn't particularly good at. Everything else is basically outstanding. It has 5% less accuracy than every other super heavy on Blue 4, I believe, and the M1 mod and the V4. They all have 70%, but other than that, it's just Jesus. PD76B. No, you don't need this cheap fire support anyways. It's, first of all, it's bad. Second, because no MG, bad gun for 15 points, and also pretty slow. And then it is in a tank tab, meaning it costs a lot of AP, considering what else you will probably be putting in. And then of course you don't need it. You have the Merkava 2A, you have the Zeldas, yeah. And again, these cheap tanks, there's no need for them because you have spikes to deal with light armored stuff. Bedouins are basically a must-have if you want affordable Recon infantry for the pure purpose of spotting. They're fine. Sadly, they have an M14 and not an anti-tank weapon, but they're only regular. They're not meant to fight anyways, so while they obviously would be better with something like even a law, it's not really a big deal. And there are these scenarios where the M14 is actually kind of nice to have, but 95% of the time you will be turning off your gun anyways. HVMS is light vehicle killer, 29 RPM, and those are actual 29 RPM and not like only the ammo consumption. Obviously, though, it does have no HE whatsoever, so worthless against infantry, like actually worthless. It can be a little meme unit, but with the Maglans and other stuff that you will probably have hard to fit in. And again, with spikes around, it doesn't really fill a role or an important role. Recon jeeps are useless, so obviously skip this. Maglans. They are easier to spot when they fire than other ATGM squads because they have a high noise value on their ATGMs, but still they're fast. They have innate very good stealth. They have their own optics. They can spot the enemy tanks. They're easy to get at flanks and easy to get side shots with. They're just, I don't think I need to explain why they are amazing. While they only have 5 HP, and you generally shouldn't really engage, especially against other elite infantry or more than one enemy squad in fights. If they're sitting in a town and enemy infantry is charging at them, Maglans will still murder them. They still have the same DPS, virtually the same DPS as if they were 10 men, meaning that being defensively in a town, meaning standing still and thus not using stabilizers, and getting the 70% HE damage reduction, they will still murder basically every infantry that's coming up to them. They have the best MG in the game, which is a stat copy of the Minimi, and a carbine. So yeah, it's just ridiculous, which you probably knew already. I like to run one card, I think in a Recon and one card in the Anafa just to have, you know, the option of getting them fast on the flanks in the opener especially. And Recon not even so much for the optics, but just because it's fast at off-road speed, has a Browning and 10 HP. So in this case, and considering they already cost 35 points, I don't mind paying 5 points more, because usually I'm not really a fan of the Recon Scouts. Recon Scouts of the Recon transports. Ramity is useless, no stabilizer, heat, low rate of fire, 1 armor, bad range, bad accuracy. Yeah. TCM, fun little unit, AA with its own optics and stealth. Technically a counter to Tigers, Recon Tigers, because helicopters with stealth, they don't get spotted by air detection. Or what I mean is, it doesn't matter what air detection your AA has, they all spot a helicopter with stealth at the same point. So ground optics is what you need to spot Recon helicopters with stealth earlier. And this will be to TCM, but the TCM gets outranged by the Tigers, so yeah. It's a fun little meme unit, but it's not really very good, because it does have the same gun as a TCM, and you pay 20 points more, and the optics and stealth just aren't worth it. This is kind of needed, in my opinion, because usually you rely so much on your Bedouins, and just having this for extra optics and for the opener as well, because your wheeled opener is pretty bad, you will also need this just to at least spot the enemy early on and then can at least react with your mech stuff earlier. Very, very important, I think, in Israel deck. Laser is a very good Recon tank for its price. While it does fill, again, the same role as Spikes in terms of countering light armored vehicles, it does have its own stealth and optics, so for flanks and stuff, it does fulfill that role as well. So definitely worth putting in, and compared to the HVMS, it can obviously shoot at infantry. And 8 armor isn't too bad either, in case you have to fight against an AMX-10, although most likely will still lose. Vehicles, you have the whole Jeep line. Maypads, basically somewhere between a Tau and a Tau 2 and an iTau. 22 AP, but 2800 meter range, so pretty good at that. Yeah, it's honestly not too bad. It's obviously very niche, because some maps you just can't utilize this at all, and Spikes is all you need. But like an open field and paddy field or something, you might get some use out of this unit, so don't underestimate this. These are not really worth using. Again, like the cheap ATGM vehicles are often, in general, not that great, with a few exceptions. But in Israel, even more so, because you just buy Doorbans and Maglans. So the only real options are these, because I have the extra long range, as well as I have Fleets and a Perret. Perret basically the same thing, the missile, meaning except for 10% extra accuracy and stabilizers, you also get 24 of them, and you have 6 front armor and 3 side armor, which means that at least on max range you can survive most tank shots. The only tank with its gun, not ATGM of course, the only tank gun that can one-shot you at max range is the M1A2, sorry. You will need 24 AP to one-shot a Pere at max range. So that's worth noting. Other than that, they're obviously very expensive and die to nearly every ATGM in one shot. So especially when the infantry ATGM is like sneaking up to them, and they obviously can't counter them with anything. So they're actually pretty easy to kill, as well as plain ATGMs, of course. They will just one-shot them, and they're ATGM. They're like magnets for these kind of units. So they can do a shit ton of work, but they're also easy to lose. So yeah, I prefer the high fields, because it's just cheaper, and I think you also get more of them per card. But you could also say that, if you're paying 80 points, you might as well pay these extra points for that little bit of survivability. And of course, extra accuracy. And at 27 AP, the difference between like the first missile hitting or missing can obviously make quite a big difference. It's really old. Oh yeah, Artillerie Transport and Nagbaron. Most of the time, there's no point in using either of these. If you have access to both and you want like a heavy armored transport, I would always go for the Artillerie because it's also faster and gets an extra MG. But I think it's just there's no real solution. You could maybe meme around with Messayat in the Artillerie or something. But it's yeah, I don't know. Generally, I don't know. I'm not necessarily saying it's bad, but I don't really see a purpose for it either. It's weird. Yeah. Helicopter, the Cephai is very good. The only downside is it doesn't have medium optics, which would alleviate it to probably the best anti-air helicopter in the game. Which I would right now probably say the DAB is, because the DAB strikes a perfect balance between affordability, survivability, lethality, self-sufficiency, and usefulness is a bit weird, but what I mean with usefulness is even if you open with a DAB and there's no enemy helicopters to kill, you can still use it for something else. Like a Gazelle Celtic is a pure anti-air helicopter, but the DAB with the guns can still do something else. The medium optics means it doesn't necessarily rely on your Recon helicopters to spot something. It is very fast, it has 6 HP, and while the Stinger don't have quite a range, the high speed, and especially in the opener if the helicopters are flying towards each other, the low range isn't really a big issue. At Cephai, if it had medium optics, I think would be even better, because the rocket pods and a gun with a turret means that it is even more effective against ground targets. It also has 6 HP, it's also fast. Yeah, and by the way, the DAB, I said it before, don't underestimate the gun. It doesn't have a turret, but once it starts firing and is aligned, it has a massive DPS. But yeah, no optics means it will be not as self-sufficient, and especially if your opponent starts with something like a Tiger, you will need Recon around. Cephai, your usual, flank, light armored or infantry fire support helicopter, similarly to the H1J, very useful, affordable. You can't go wrong with this. Patton is your own Apache, just like the Dutch one. If you want a heavy anti-tank helicopter, and maybe you can't fit it in Nimrod, and you still definitely want a heavy anti-tank helicopter, the Patton is your choice. Also, you don't have to be as careful with microing your missiles since you get 16 of them. And the autocannon can also be useful at times. And medium optics can also be nice. Now, planes. The Ayid is a pretty bad stealth seat plane. It is obviously very cheap, but the main issue is that no stealth, low speed, and low range on the missiles is that it is very hard to actually kill enemy AA with it. Obviously, you're still gonna force the enemy AA to be turned off, but while that can also sometimes be the main reason to use seat, ideally you'd still like to kill it, right? and especially if you buy a seed plane the first time in a game, you want to catch your opponent by surprise. And the Aid is just very easy to detect, to play around against, and to protect against. So I would always go for the Kerners 2000. It also doesn't have stealth, but it has more range on missiles, and it is faster. So it is a lot more lethal. The Sparrows, while they aren't great, behind your main ASF or something, they can occasionally still hit the enemy plane and potentially cause it to get killed because of that. So, while you should never use this as your main ASF unless you're very, very desperate or something. Don't underestimate the effect the Sparrows can have. Obviously, yeah, but except for the stealth, it is a very, very good seaplane, decently survivable, affordable, 2 per card, good base accuracy, so you don't have to upfit it. It's good, not great, but good. A decent compromise between high end and low end, which is decent mid end seaplane, meaning affordable but still not like so low end that it's nearly useless as a seat itself. Like the Puff, for example, could be considered. The Bass is a decent low end ASF. I would never use this as my only ASF in this deck. But if you run 2 cards, the Bass is a good choice, especially in 1 versus 1. In team games, you might want to go the Bass, Meshuppah, and the Barrack 2. In 1 versus 1s, maybe you want to run the Bass and the Barrack 2. Even so, it is a good ASF card, but should definitely not be your only ASF card. In general, I would always run 2 cards of ASF in Israel. Bass Meshuppah is your high-end ASF. The only high-end, and with high-end I mean it comes at 1 on Elite and 2 on Untrained. Only high-end ASF with 40% ACM. Every other one has 50%. However, it does have 70% accuracy on the medium range missiles, although it loses 700 meter range compared to the AIM 120 and the R77, as well as the Mika EM, which in turn also has, for no good reason, 65% accuracy. Still, even though it does have only 40% accuracy, still obviously very deadly and still pretty survivable. Still worth running in team games. In one versus ones, I wouldn't. I think especially there, you would much prefer the ECM instead of the accuracy. But in team games, it is not as big of an issue. Kerners, the strong, in my opinion, the strongest plane in the game, overall speaking. Or maybe, well, strongest, yes, but also the most impactful. It can be your anti-tank plane, it can be your blind bomber, it can be your, it can destroy your opener, or enemy's opener, because, it homes onto, enemy units, be it enemy infantry, enemy IFVs, enemy tanks. Compared to an ATGM plane, it obviously also deals massive splash damage, so it'll, if your opponent has a lot of cheap vehicles, it's useful against that. If there's a single high-end tank, it's very strong against that. If you don't spot your enemy units or you want to blind snipe a CV, it is strong against that. It is strong against literally every ground unit in the entire game. The only thing it is kind of weak against is blind sniping, I guess, or blind bombing heavy tanks. But outside of that, it is just so versatile and so ridiculously good. It's fast, it is decently survivable, it is affordable, it is 2 per card. There's nothing not to like. It has a high time over target, so you could, because it is such an impactful plane, the enemy will want to kill it. So with 65 seconds time over target, you could also just try to bait him, circulate around near your base, and then force your opponent into an error by maybe, baiting them into going deep with their ASF, trying to kill your Kerners, and you in turn kill their ASF without losing your Kerners maybe. But it is just so good. And similarly to the Kerners, the Sparrows, while not being very accurate, in second line behind your ASFs or something, don't underestimate this. It does have 50% ACM. As blind sniping, it is not nearly as good as a Kerners. If you're good at splitting, you can hit a lot or like 4 different targets at 4 different positions with these laser guided bombs. It's still good against single target tanks, high-end tanks. It's by no means a bad plane, but not nearly as impactful or universally useful as the Kernas. If you can fit it in, and you want a very survivable plane that can deal with light vehicles, that might be your choice. It's, like I said, by no means bad, but I think there are, even besides the Kernas, there are better choices. Lavi is your heavy bomber. It is a very strong bomber, and that's really all there is to say. Not as good as the F111C, but still very, very good. 10, 15 HE bombs, high survivability, super card. Also, I think mostly not used as much, not because it's bad, but because there are so many other planes that you usually want. But by no means a bad decision. Unless you are running this over the Kernas, I think it's bad, but as long as you don't replace the Kernas with it, you're not gonna do anything wrong using this plane. Cluster Bomber, it's not a good one. It's not bad, but it's just not great either. It's fine, but outside of like the best cluster bombers, which are the Aardvark and the Danish F-16, I think they're not worth running most of the time, and this is also one of them. Barak is your high-end version of the Peace Pheasant, if you will. Peace Pheasant 2, that is. Also 4 ATGMs, but upgraded Mavericks, so we get a bit more range, more accuracy, and you have more ECM, you're a bit faster, better turn radius, some short range missiles. So if you want a second, or if you want a more, assuming the enemy tank is at full HP, the Barak is gonna be more consistent most of the time. At like single target removal when it comes to tanks, or like 2 tanks. So there's that. I like to run the Barak and the Kernas, for example. So yeah, it's a very decent anti-tank plane. Yeah. Barak 2, your mid high-end ASF, you get 2 of it on veteran. It has 50% ECM. Also has 70% medium range missiles. It is just a beast. Obviously, only 4 missiles in total, similarly to the Yak 141, but it's more survivable and has better base accuracy on the medium range missiles. Absolute beast. I would basically always run this. Like I said, in 1 versus 1s, I would run the Barak 2 and the Bass. In team games, I would run the Barak 2 and the Bass Measure Par. Yeah, just a very strong ASF. We have the Shahak, which is an actually decent anti-helo plane. It is fast, even has some ECM, high veterancy, high availability. Maybe you remember the video where I killed an SU-25T with this. Yeah, it's fine. It's obviously not gonna kill planes very often, but it can also be used like in the opener to scout for enemy helicopters because it is so cheap. Yeah, definitely not a worst plane. In team games, it's usually hard to make good use of these, outside of the opener maybe. But in 1 versus 1s, definitely worth considering, I'd say. Rocket pod plane, yeah, like all rocket pod planes, they're nearly all, they're fine. They're just rocket pod planes. They fill their own niche of killing like single or two squads that you might spot, or like light vehicles that are in or not in cover. It's fast, decent payload. Can split rocket pods as well, by the way. Yeah, rocket pod plane. What else is there to say? It's an okay napalm bomber, but napalm bombers themselves are already pretty bad. There's like one exception. There's one napalm bomber that I would consider good, and that is the Phantom, because it is survivable, cheapish, and has a high payload. Nearly every other napalm bomber has mediocre payload at best, and the Phantom is also probably the only one that's actually somewhat survivable. I guess the only other consideration is the MiG-29, but it's an napalm and HE bomber at the same time, so it's very unique in that regard. And it's an okay payload, but napalm planes are already very niche. They're already very limited in their usefulness, and in such a contested air tab, I think there's no place in using this. Last but not least, we have the Kefir. It is a decent bomber, but it is not very survivable. It is very fast. If you want like a blind bomber that is more affordable than a Lavi and also reloads faster, let me actually check. Because I don't even know off the top of my head how they roughly compare when it comes to reloading. It reloads 2000 supply per shot, and the Lavi 350. So 3500 supply reloaded for the Lavi, 2000 for the Kefir. I don't know off the top of my head how much supply you get per second, but you know, if you were to convert that in like 1-to-1 seconds, it's like 20 seconds Kefir, 35 seconds Lavi, so that equivalent of reload time of their bombs. So not quite twice, but relatively close to twice as fast when it comes to reloading the payload. The J7H in comparison, which is a 120 HE bomber, has to reload 1500 supplies. So it is quite close to the J7H when it comes to reloading the bombs. So it is ready quite fast, assuming it's not damaged after it dropped its bomb. So if you like to oppress your opponent with a lot of bombers, it's a pretty, well, I guess the best choice that you can get with Israel. But again, while it's certainly no bad plane, I think Lavi, Kurnas, and Barak are probably your go-to anti-ground planes, and then you want to seed, probably you want ASFs, so hard to fit in my opinion, unless you're playing airborne, but that's a different story. So yeah, that's Israel. You can also play mech and armored, but it's obviously the strongest unspec, because then you don't lose your mag lens. This is my team deck that I'm currently running. Again, nothing really too outstanding. Basma, and Barak, like I said. And yeah, that's all there is to it. Hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and I will hopefully see you next time.